Before we get started, I want to mention something that slipped my mind in the last one about control surfaces, and that is that the effectiveness of all control surfaces increases with airspeed because airflow increases. Again, the effectiveness of all control surfaces increases with airspeed because airflow increases. Today is another short one. We're going to be discussing a couple of different types of airplanes. Now, if I decided to truly dive into every single type of aircraft with you and discuss the specifics of each one, this video would probably be an hour long, and you'd most likely lose your mind needlessly trying to remember the details of each one. You don't need to know all those, especially at this point in the early stages, so we're not going to get into all that. For this lesson, we're just going to keep it real simple and discuss a few distinguishing characteristics that you'll most likely see during the course of your training. These are going to be low-wing planes versus high-wing planes, as well as two different types of landing gear configurations. We'll also discuss a couple of outliers like seaplanes and aircraft with tandem gear. Alright, let's talk about high wing versus low wing. You show up for your first day of flight school, your trainer walks you outside to the ramp to see the plane you'll be piloting, and you see it sitting there, a nice, shiny Tecnam Sierra, basically a Porsche with wings. Well, just as you get your hopes up, your instructor says not a chance and directs you to the left where you find what you'll actually be flying, which is most likely the much cheaper Cessna 172. This is a high wing aircraft. The term is pretty self-explanatory, but with these, the wings are higher on the plane, sitting right above the doors. There's some pros to these, but also some cons. As far as the pros, high-wing aircrafts are great for beginners because they're very stable and forgiving. Even with an instructor in the cockpit, you're bound to make mistakes here and there. As a student, being in one of these planes will make those mistakes a lot less consequential. You'll also have safer landings at slower speeds and an easier time with ground clearance on rougher, poorly paved runways. They're also easier to get in and out of. In a high-wing airplane, you're going to have better downward visibility, meaning you can see what's below you. This is handy for spotting landmarks, having a better view of the airport and runways, and most importantly, aircraft that are below you. However, as a student, you're more likely to have aircraft above you than below you. And this brings us to the cons. High-wing planes make it pretty difficult to see what's above you, so you'll get a pretty good neck workout in trying to spot airplanes at higher altitudes. High wings are also a lot slower because they have slightly more drag. If you're planning a trip to fly a longer distance, you'll probably want to take a low wing, not a high wing. If you take a high wing, you might as well drive instead. Speaking of which, let's talk about low wing planes. That Tecnam Sierra you thought you'd be flying at first is an example of a low wing aircraft. As far as the pros for these, contrary to high-wing airplanes, low-wing airplanes have better visibility for what's above. They have more responsive handling, like you're driving a BMW instead of a minivan, and they also have less drag, making them faster in the air. It's also easier to access engines and fuel tanks. For the cons, low-wing planes are less stable at slower airspeeds. They're more difficult to get in and out of. The wings are closer to the ground, which can make landings on rougher fields more risky, and obviously there's lower downward visibility. Think of it this way. High wing equals calm, stable, and beginner friendly, and low wing equals fast, agile, and performance focused. Low wing planes are a lot cooler, but looking cool is something to worry about when you actually know what you're doing. So when you first start out, stick to high wing. They're a lot safer for beginners. Alright, now let's talk about landing gear configurations. These are typically categorized by wheel placement. The main two that you'll be seeing as a student pilot are tricycle or nose landing gear and the conventional or tailwheel landing gear. Visibly, the only thing that distinguishes these two is the placement of the third wheel. On one, it's below the nose, and on the other, it's below the tail, but you've probably put that together by now. In a nutshell, planes with tricycle or nose landing gear are generally seen as being easier to use, with increased ground stability and easier steering and braking. These are also less likely to tip forward since the nose gear acts as somewhat of a kickstand. This configuration is common on most modern airplanes, including airliners, business jets, and training aircraft. Planes with conventional or tailwheel landing gear are more difficult to use, especially for beginners. They're harder to control during takeoff and landing and require much more rudder expertise than tricycle, which is due to two main concepts. One is gyroscopic precession, which we'll discuss in our aerodynamics lessons, and the other is what's known as a ground loop. Since the center of gravity is aft of, or behind, the main landing gear on a tailwheel airplane, any slight yaw movement creates momentum that wants to spin the tail around, usually during landing or takeoff. So yeah, no pressure when piloting one of these. They're used mainly because they're better for rough, unpaved runways and due to their lighter, simpler design. Some less common ones include quadricycle landing gear and bicycle or tandem landing gear. These are mainly seen on military aircraft, so their specs probably are not directly useful to you right now, but if you're super interested, just, Google it. Quadricycle layouts are mainly seen on ultra-heavy aircraft, which makes sense. The more weight you have, the more support you'll need. With tandem landing gear, the layout consists of two main wheels aligned along the center of the aircraft with one behind the other, and usually two outriggers on the outsides, which are smaller wheels to increase the plane's ground stability, like training wheels on a bicycle. One more configuration to consider is the large floats on a seaplane. Now, if you take off and land in one of these on your first day of flight school, your instructor will most likely get his certification revoked. It's solely for operations on water, not land, and the use of the large floats rather than wheels allow the plane to take off and land on the water. Again, you most likely won't see these three anytime soon. Okay, that's all for today. In the next one, we'll discuss the 3 airplane design characteristics and what effect they'll have on you as a pilot. Then we'll get into instrumentation, and I'll help you get familiar with the cockpit and the aircraft's different systems. It may sound complicated, but we'll break it down step by step to ensure you won't have any problems. As always, review and study this information, and I will see you in the next one.